Hi everyone, I'm Emily Marsh from the Greater Concord Chamber of Commerce. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar with Riverbend Community Mental Health. I'm so excited to share this second session in our series with you. Last week we talked about common conditions and we have 2 more sessions planned. So if you would like to learn more about those, you can go to our website, concordnhchamber.com. We have a video of last week's event, and then we have links to register for future events, so you'll want to check that out. Today, you can submit questions during the event. So if you'd like to do that, what you're going to do is move your mouse, or if you're on mobile, tap your screen, and you'll see Zoom's buttons pop up. You want to click the one that says Q&A. From there, you can simply type in your question and submit it. Your questions will only be seen by me and our presenter today, so it is anonymous. The other attendees will not see the questions you ask, so really feel free to continue the conversation in there. Share with us, as the presentation goes. We may answer some questions during this session or save most of them for the end, depending on where they fit in the flow and what topics we're talking about. So again, to submit questions, you're going to move your mouse or tap your screen, click on Q&A, and then type your question in. So before we begin, I just want to thank Riverbend Community Mental Health for sharing these great presentations with us and working with us on this series, and would like to introduce you to Karen.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everybody, and I'm really glad you could join us today. So my name is Karen Jansen, and I'm the Vice President of Community Affairs at Riverbend Community Mental Health. One of the big things that Riverbend is charged with is working on community education and really trying to break down any barriers that they are for people to receiving treatment. And one of the biggest barriers that we still have is stigma. So I thought today what we would do is a little bit of a recap of what was discussed last week's webinar on demystifying common conditions. And then we'll see how that kind of plays into stigma. If I can get my mouse to go. Emily, now I'm having technical difficulties.
That's okay, it's real life.
There we go.
Oh, you got it? Okay.
Sorry about that. So the statistics for people with mental illness and with addiction are pretty staggering. If you think about this, there are approximately 7.2 billion people across the world. And 1 in 5 of those individuals has a mental illness. And, if you think about, wow, that's a large number. It's about 1.4 billion people in total of people that are dealing with some sort of a mental health issue, either right now or they've had it in their past. And that's approximately, to give you an idea of how many people are 1.4 billion, it's about the population of the size of Africa. So the more we can educate ourselves around mental illness and substance use disorders, the better we can recognize the issue, the better we can support people, the better we can share our resources and reduce stigma. So what does stigma really mean? It's got its roots in Latin, meaning mark or brand, and over the centuries, it's kind of morphed into a very negative connotation. It's attitude or belief that motivates people to fear, reject, and avoid and discriminate against other groups of people. And this, stigma doesn't just apply to people with a mental illness or someone with a substance use disorder. We think about people who are living in poverty. We stigmatize people who are homeless. We stigmatize people who have all sorts of disabilities, people who are basically different than us. So let's talk a little bit more about stigma. Most people who live with a mental illness, as sad as it is, at some point have been actually blamed for their condition. And they've been called names, their symptoms. Sometimes you can refer to it as a phase. And I think about like names, or they're in this phase. Sometimes we refer to people who are, oh, they're just really extra sensitive. Or, oh yeah, they're a little moody today. Oh, don't go near them. They seem to be just a little off. They just can't seem to get themselves organized. If they only tried harder. And those attitudes and beliefs, unfortunately, are very, very common. And the ramifications can be really serious. Sometimes the stigma, people have been illegally discriminated against. So stigma, whether we want to think about it in its extreme form or in a gentle form, it holds a lot of power over the person being discriminated against. And when you say that, you think to yourself, well, how does stigma actually make the person feel? If you think about it, I think about it sometimes in ways that we make like slight remarks about people, like, oh, they're so blonde. Is everybody who has blonde hair, what does that mean? Or, oh, they just kind of walk around grumpy all the time. And if we don't know what's happening, the people feel rejected, you can feel worthless. And in the process of putting out our subjective views on people, we end up devaluating people, excluding people, just purely on the basis of either a health condition, how they look, or maybe what their social status is. The other piece about stigma in our culture or across the world is that self-stigma. You hear these things enough, and the negative feelings or the negative words come across, and people start believing it. They start to feel that they're worthless. They start to feel like they have no place with the rest of us. And so oftentimes you can end up with some self-defeating behaviors. So it just as, an overall recap, simply that stigma creates negative feelings. It's about someone else, and it causes that person to think differently or less of an individual, and that individual oftentimes will start to feel worse about themselves. Uh-oh. Sorry about that. Having a little technical difficulties here. So overall, people who experience stigma oftentimes feel really ashamed for something that's really totally out of their control. And In terms of people with a mental health issue or a substance use disorder, they will often not seek the help they need. And so what's happening is people, not only are they suffering inside, but they feel so dejected that they don't go out and get treatment, and oftentimes inappropriate treatment can happen, such as self-medication or self-harming behaviors, or some of the other things that were talked about last week. And think about how horrible that would be if not only are you having to deal with the conditions of your illness, but you're also having to deal with the perceptions of other individuals. So the question starts to be, what can you do? The first thing is we've got to learn to start talking openly about mental health, about substance use disorders. The second thing you can do is you can start to do exactly what you're doing now. Let's educate yourself and let's educate others. Encourage equality between physical and behavioral health. So for so long, we have separated the head from the body. And that, if you think about it, that doesn't make any sense at all. The more we can integrate our physical health, our mental health together, the better we are, and we're treating the whole person. Show compassion for those who have a behavioral health issue. Choose empowerment over shame. So what does this really mean? Give people credit, empower them, find the good, don't talk negatively about another individual. And then be really honest about treatment. We have a motto here, treatment works, and it does. And at some point, every one of us is going to need some type of professional treatment. And most importantly, let's be conscious of the language we use. And what we really want to do is use person-centered language. Let's put the individual back at the center of what we're talking about. And so let's talk a little bit more about what person-centered language means. Person-centered language is about the individual. It's not about the disease. So instead of saying, oh, look at that alcoholic, that addict, that druggie, that's a person who has an illness. So you name the illness. And you say that's a person with that substance use disorder. It's no different that you wouldn't call somebody with cancer a carcinogen, but what you would say is somebody who has cancer. Somebody who's in recovery, somebody whose mental health is in a really good space, somebody who is no longer using drugs or alcohol or any other type of addictive things such as gambling. They're a person living in recovery. And I think the hardest thing, it's so easy for us to walk around and go, oh, you're being crazy. Oh, I'm a little OCD. Oh, I've got super psycho grandparent coming over. That's not how we want to talk about people. Those are people, that's a person who has a mental illness. So the goal is that we're separating out the disease from the individual themselves. And I think the finest example that I've seen of when we separate the person out and we let them become who they are rather than labeling to something we think that they are is around preferred pronouns. There's a lot of people who, you know, he, his, him, she, her, hers, they, them, theirs. And I have to honestly say that the they, them, theirs for me is difficult because I think of that as a plural, but it makes a lot of sense. If that's how the person identifies themselves, that's how we want them, and they want to be recognized. It's no different than if it's a person that is living with anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, any one of the very common conditions. They want to be identified as a person first and who they are, and not to be labeled by what we think they should be. When we use strength-based language, it helps us to feel a lot better, us as the person working with the individual or our friends. It also helps to promote recovery. When we use the negative language, we're reinforcing the discrimination or the stigma, and we're causing people to isolate. You know, if you think about it, if you're constantly being told that you're an addict or an ex-addict or a junkie or you're crazy, and you start to believe it, like we had talked about a little bit earlier, do you honestly think that that person is going to really want to get into recovery and get into treatment? And we know that treatment works. So we need to feel encouraged, we need to empower that person, and we need to not devalue that person. So, unconscious bias. This is a really, really big topic. And it's about social stereotypes about certain groups of people that individuals form outside of their own conscious or awareness. And it happens, unconscious bias is also known as implicit bias, and it comes to us because of our cultural environment, our background, our personal experience, media representations, many of our social experiences. It's not something that any of us set out to do, but it is something that is inherent in every single one of us. So there's gender bias, there could be ageism bias, and there's affinity bias, meaning that we only like to be around people who are like us. And so how do we address this unconscious bias? So personally, the first things we need to do is promote self-awareness. So let's pause for a minute and let's I was thinking about this the other day. Think about your childhood and think about something that had maybe a negative experience. And how have you held on to that? So something as simple as a dog. Take a breed of dog. It's hard to imagine, but think about like a black lab. And you had a really negative experience with that dog. And from that point forward, you're like, I just don't like dogs. I just don't want anything to do with them. Which makes a lot of sense. But if you step back and you said, well, what was the context and what can I do? What can I do to counter this bias? It's like, I'm going to, okay, I understand it. I'm going to now work hard to put myself maybe in an uncomfortable situation, and I'm going to figure out what the root of this is. Social groups, you know, think about the diversity that is that we have in our community. Maybe just because our exposure is such that we haven't had experience with a lot of different social groups, people who think differently than us. I think one thing we can do is to really work on diversifying who we interact with. So we can take steps as a person, and I think, but the other thing we can do is look at how organizationally we can change things. And we can work on strategies to diffuse unconscious bias, particularly in the workplace. So one of the things that we can do is develop solid objective indicators in these outcomes for hiring, evaluation, and promotions to reduce standard stereotypes. It sounds easier than it probably is. But it shouldn't have to be so hard. So when we're doing it from an organizational standpoint, we're pulling our feelings out of the situation and we're trying to be as critically objective as we possibly can. Another thing is to develop standardized criteria to assess performance. So does every employee get the same assessment? Do you have, or is it just the opinion of the individual that is doing the performance review? Develop and utilize structured interviews and hiring criteria. So this is an interesting piece. And one of the tactics that we really like to use here at Riverbend when we're doing structured interviews is we do what's called behavioral interviewing. So what we're trying to get at is not to get at the laundry list of accomplishments, but to really assess in a structured, seamless way how is this person going to work and behave within the environment of which this job requires? And probably the most important thing that we can do as an organization is provide training for staff. And when we think about provide training, we're not just talking about job skill development. We're talking about providing the training on like mental health first aid. How do you recognize the signs of mental illness, and what are the tactical things that I can do? Trainings like the series that are going on with the chamber. Trainings, you can dive deep on trainings on unconscious bias. There's a lot of trainings that are out there on person-centered language, and to do an evaluation of your workplace and what's going on. When bias is reduced, we can increase communication and open dialogue. And then with the increased communication and dialogue and speaking constructively to each other, in a stigma-free environment, you know, we reduce suspicion, we reduce mistrust. We create a work environment where everybody feels valued, where everybody feels belonging, and where everybody really wants to come and be. So there's other things that you can do for in terms of organizations and enduring your hiring process that I'm sure my colleague and the Jamie Corman, who will be doing the consulting HR, can talk to more directly. But there's blind hiring. There's the you know, not looking at where somebody went to school, really looking at the merits of what is in their resume, not worrying about what their hobbies are, really taking a look of, do they have the tools to them to be able to do the job and function in your work environment. So I think the thing that for me with stigma is that if we all work together to educate ourselves, we all work on thinking about how to better address and talk with one another, then people aren't going to be afraid to seek treatment, and our workplaces overall are just going to be much more productive and happier places to be. And I think next week we're going to talk a little bit more about how to create that culture of wellness and some of the tactical steps that you can take to create a quote-unquote stigma-free zone, to work a little bit more on this unconscious bias. But I really wanted, for this week, I really wanted people to understand some of the deeper underlying issues of what happens with stigma and how it makes people feel. And the fact that, unfortunately, it's still all around us, and it's our job to combat it. So I didn't know if anybody has any questions or anything that they wanted to ask. I can see in the chat that some people are sharing a few stories about this is a great one. I was ridiculed as a kid. Well, it's not that great, but it's ridiculed as a kid that I couldn't stay above the snow, and I always fell through the snow, and kids laughed as I was a little heavier than they were, and I always considered myself overweight. And can you imagine carrying that around and the long-term impact that that has when you just feel that somebody is, that you're just not quite there. And that's a simple example of being stigmatized and how it's changed your behavior, and how it's, you know, maybe the bias that has gone with that. So can you repeat how to look up the person-centered tool to use within an organization? Yes. Let's see. So, person-centered language. I'm going to try this. As you can tell, I'm not that adept at going backwards, but I will look in my notes. So person-centered language is basically put the person at the center of what you're going to do. Instead of saying that somebody is a junkie, they are a person who has an addiction or a substance use disorder. Someone who is in recovery we talk about that with somebody who is no longer misusing substances. And you know, when we think of addiction, or at least I will say that I automatically think about going to alcohol, which is the highest abused drug, and thank you for the help on my screen, but my computer didn't work with the hours. But there are other types of addictions. You know, we think about sex addiction, there's gambling addiction, there's screen time video addiction. So a person who is living in recovery is a person who is a lot of times would have formerly been referred to as an ex-addict. Now, we also talk with people who live with a mental illness. And sometimes when you're in the throes of your mental illness and your disease is getting the better of you, you think that, oh, there's no way out. But once you're in control of the situation or the disease, that individual is also a person who's living in recovery. It's a person who's living with a mental illness. So here's the question. Can you give a story or example scenario of questions, answers from a structured interview that focuses on behavior and not accomplishments? Oh, I've got a whole list of them. I think one of my most favorite ones is, tell me about a time that everything was all planned out and going very, very well, and all of a sudden it went south very, very quickly. So that could be planning an event. I happen to be an event planner. So I thought that everything was going really, really well. I had all my ducks in a row. And then all of a sudden it turned out to be an absolute disaster. How did you deal with it? What did you learn from it? And how, if you were to go back, what would you do differently? So in that, you're learning how people deal with crisis management. You're learning how people self-reflect. And you're learning about how somebody is going to use their critical thinking skills to self-improve. So, does anybody have any other questions that they can think of, or that they're interested, or something that I can use to help them?
So I'm just going to jump in here, Karen. I have a couple questions, but just for you all to know, you can continue to submit questions. We're watching the chat, but the best way to submit a question is to click on the Q&A button and just simply type it in there. So, so my first question here for you, Karen, is what's the difference between blaming someone for their condition and empowering them to take care of themselves? So kind of just acknowledging that there is some control that they have and helping them feel that they are empowered, but also not, you know, completely shaming them at the same time.
Right. So I think it's a great question, Emily. I think the way that we look into that is to affirm the person's feelings, make them feel heard, make them know that yes, this is not a great situation. I understand, you know, I am here to support you. Sometimes you don't know what that support looks like, right? But if you, when you can say to somebody, I am here to support you, I will do what you can, versus well, that's easily solvable. All you have to do is pick up that line. Why haven't you picked up that phone? Why don't you make that phone call? So I put up on the screen here our crisis line. I think that's, so say somebody is in crisis with a mental health issue. And instead of shaming the person, go, well, this is so easy, why don't you just pick up the phone? It would be, why don't I sit here with you and we can make the phone call together? And I'll be by your side. So in the first scenario, when you put it all on the individual to take care of the problem, rather, it has a very, they start to feel guilty. They worry about their self-worth and whether or not they, and could start second guessing, well, maybe it really isn't that big a deal. So I think, you know, standing by that person and helping them with the tools. So the question is, what resources do you have for doing a training for employees on unconscious bias? We have, you can always give me a call here at Riverbend, and we are off. If our clinicians have time, we're pretty busy right at the moment, more than happy to put together trainings. We do a lot of these trainings in-house all the time to help our staff realize some of their, and how do I put it, to do some self-awareness. The other way is there's the state of New Hampshire has some really good trainings on unconscious bias. And I think they're a little bit booked up at the moment, but I'm more than happy to have somebody just give us a call and we will see what we can do to help out. How do you suggest someone's asked, how do you suggest bringing to someone's attention that they may have a problem, or how do you suggest someone suggest them getting help? I think in that one, well, I'm going to go with the thought that the problem is somebody who's experiencing a mental health crisis, because and in that one, it's a matter of, again, sitting down very calmly and saying, it doesn't seem like things are going well. Is there something? How can I help you? Name it. I think that's the first thing we all learn, is you've just got to name what's happening. Now, if someone is if you're witnessing someone who is exhibiting maybe stigmatizing behaviors, or there's someone that is maybe said something that has a little bit of unconscious bias there, that one's a little trickier. It depends upon how well you know that person, maybe, but to be gentle, you always need to be gentle whenever you're addressing something with somebody. But with a colleague or a friend, it's like, wow, really? Did you actually really mean to say what you just said? That seems like that could have been a little hurtful. Or, I don't quite understand where you're coming from. I don't think of it in that that form. So, you know, the reality is you have to be a pretty brave person, and sometimes stick your neck out and be the one to take the first step with all of this. So,
all right, I have another question for you, Karen.
okay.
As we're waiting for some more to roll in. Near the beginning of the presentation, you talked about the connection between physical health and behavioral health. What do you mean by that, and how do we stigmatize behavioral health
right.
versus physical health?
So we do it in a lot of ways, but so let's back up. Head is connected to the body, and sometimes if I don't feel good in my stomach, maybe it's because of something I ate, or maybe it's something that's going on in my head. Classic example is a child not wanting to go to the first day of school. They're very, very anxious. They're nervous. The uncertainties are abounding, and they've gotten to a point where they just want to throw up and they don't feel really good. You can treat them for the stomach ache all you want, but it's not going to resolve the feelings and the emotions behind those feelings that they're having in their head. So you have to really sit there and, you know, kind of tease out, is this a physical ailment, or is it a behavioral health ailment? Another instance I can think of is an unproductive employee at work. Very sluggish, very tired, not kind of mopey, not doing well. Well, is there something physically wrong with them? Is there a disease, or is there a traumatic something that has happened in their life that is causing them to just physically shut down? So the two are so interconnected, and when we are seeking treatment, say if I'm feeling exhausted, I go to my doctor, the doctor might say, well, you got to get some more sleep. But what is the root of why I need more sleep? Is it because I've got a physical disease going on, or do I have a mental health issue that is now manifesting itself as a physical issue? So the two are very, very interconnected, and we need to be thinking about them all the time as interconnected.
All right, I have another comment someone shared that I really think fits this issue, and I just thought it was very well said. Someone wrote, I think the illness doesn't define who the person is, it's just a condition they are experiencing. Do you feel that that's true and that fits what we're talking about?
It's exactly what we're talking about. And the goal is to, by eliminating stigma, to be aware of what our unconscious biases are and to work through them, is to really, again, see the person as a person and not as their condition.
Yeah, very well said. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to send them via chat or Q&A. But, is there any, last message you want to share, Karen, before I take over the screen share?
No, I think, first of all, I want to thank everybody. I think one of the things that's the most important, and this is the hardest part, is that we all need to dig deep in realizing that we all have unconscious bias. We all have stigmatized in some way, and we have to start with ourselves and to eradicate it, and then start consciously working against it in all our environments across where we live, work, and play.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm going to share some chamber news quickly.
Okay.
Put this on screen.
Yeah.
So I just want to let you know about a few upcoming webinars and other events going on. So as you know, we're continuing this series of mental health in the workplace. Next week, the topic is creating a culture of wellness. And then we have optimizing human resources. So I think that last one's going to be a lot of great resources for business owners. But Karen, you said that next week's session is very tied into this one as well. So, we're going to continue the conversation there. We do have a video recording of our first session, Demystifying Common Conditions. So, please go on our website and watch that if you did not attend. I learned so much from it, and we had a great presenter. So a couple other things going up, not on screen, but later today at 4 o'clock, we are having an online networking event. If you would like to, sign up for that last minute and join in, we would love to have you. You can learn more at concordnhchamber.com, or, send me an email or give us a call. Another webinar coming up is we're continuing our legal breakfast series. It's going to be a webinar series now with Orrin Reno, PA. Our next one is Protecting Your Business from Financial Fraud on Tuesday, October 27th. We have another networking event coming up in November, and then we're really excited about our 15th annual Pinnacle Awards. This is a hybrid event, so you can either attend in person, where we'll have limited seating and be following state guidelines for social distancing, or you can join online, and there's actually an interactive aspect to that as well. So we have some really great honorees to celebrate this year. Our Small Business of the Year, Business of the Year, Business Leader of the Year, and Nonprofit of the Year. So, go to our website, learn more, help us celebrate these great businesses and organizations. And as always, please feel free to reach out to anyone at the Chamber if you have additional questions. So I hope we'll see you next week at our next mental health webinar. Thank you all for joining. We are recording today's session, so if you register today, you'll receive a link to that, as well as some other resources. So thank you, Karen, and thank you so much.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much to Riverbend for sharing, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Right,
Thank
bye.
you.